The inside linebacker position is the Denver Broncos' biggest question mark going into training camp. Who emerges next to Alex Singleton as the team's next starter? We'll break all that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day, whether you watch us on YouTube or whether you listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on every single day, all year long, for the best objective Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more, especially as we dive deeper into the final training camp position preview, the inside linebacker position. A lot of questions. Who's going to make the 53-man roster? Can one of the Broncos guys that they have at this position break out and secure a starting spot next to Alex Singleton? We'll break it all down here on today's episode of the show. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, look, obviously this has been one of the major storylines of the offseason here for the Broncos since free agency. How do they replace the veteran presence of a player like Josey Jewell, who, look, Josey, when he was here in Denver, like early on, he had some ups and downs to start his career. He had an injury that held him out. I think it was in 2021. But then really from 2022 to 2023, he became one of the more consistent playmakers there for the Broncos defense. Like, his value to the field, to the defense in general, was impactful. He could blitz, he could get after the quarterback. Obviously, he is now a member of the Carolina Panthers, which the Broncos will play them a little bit later on this year. There'll be a little bit of a reunion there between the Bash brothers. But now Alex Singleton has emerged. He is wearing the green dot here for Denver defensively, and they are looking to figure out who it's going to be right next to him that maybe they can try to find a way to play off each other the way that Josey and Alex did, which, hey, that requires time, that requires chemistry. That is something we're going to be monitoring here as training camp begins.
And that time that he is needed to build chemistry is evident because Alex Singleton pointed out, he's accidentally almost called some of the guys next to him Josey, or Jewel, whatever he calls him out there. It's kind of funny. Like, old habits die hard, right? And when you've built that kind of chemistry with a guy, it's certainly understandable that it's going to take some time getting used to somebody else. But really, the Broncos do have a couple of clear options here right now. And I don't know that it's necessarily exciting the fan base a ton, right? With Jonas Griffith, who a lot of people do like, Cody. People like you who, man, we saw Jonas back a couple years ago when he was averaging 10 tackles a game, essentially, when he got a chance to play and was playing hard and running fast and breaking through the line of scrimmage and, just showing off his elite athleticism. And he's got traits that certainly would lead you to believe, like, all right, this guy's got some translatability. And then going into that 2022 season, he's supposed to be the breakout guy at inside linebacker. He was supposed to take the spot that ultimately now belongs to Alex Singleton. Like, that was supposed to be Jonas Griffith out there. And unfortunately, just the injury in the preseason against, I believe it was Seattle or San Francisco, one of those two teams, he goes out and unfortunately just it's led us to this alternate universe where Jonas Griffith is not the guy that's, the star inside linebacker for Denver. It's Alex Singleton, who got a contract extension, who is now wearing the green dot, who is the most reliable player at the position they have. So I'm fascinated by whether or not Jonas can return to the form that we saw a couple of years ago, right? When he was a tackling machine, just attacking the line of scrimmage with reckless abandon, but also playing smart and playing within, what he was asked to do. Blitz timing on his blitzes was outstanding. And you saw the 6'4" frame coming. The long limbs, just everything about him. He looks like a defensive end and he's moving around out there like a defensive back almost. So you really hope that Jonas Griffith can return to the form that we saw a couple of seasons ago.
Especially after suffering 2 years, 2022, midway through the season, a season-ending foot injury. That was frustrating for him. Last year in training camp, I was there. I watched it happen during a special teams drill, tears his ACL. And that really kind of threw a wrench into the plans for the Broncos. And look, they were kind of figuring out, okay, hey, like, what does our two deep behind Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton look like? And that's where, you get a guy like Justin Strnad who comes into the mix here for the Broncos. And look, is the longest tenured Bronco on the roster in terms of linebackers here. He's been on the team the longest, special teams ace for them. I thought he played pretty well last year in the preseason. And that's, I think, something that stood out to me. Not only did he showcase he could play linebacker effectively in the preseason last year, but obviously being their best special teams player alongside Tremont Smith, there is inherent value you can have there. And look, I think this is an opportunity now for Justin to maybe step up and throw his name into the hat to potentially start next to Alex Singleton. They have a lot of chemistry together. But then there's new addition in the offseason as well. There's Cody Barton, who comes over from the Washington Commanders, who I think when you look at where he's at, he probably has the most starting experience amongst the entire group of linebackers there. I mean, outside of, I'd say now, Alex Singleton. But you look at what Barton has done throughout his career, really came on as a special teams guy. We'll do a little bit of a profile on each of these guys here a little bit later on in the show, but now you have a veteran guy who can come in, compete for the starting job, as Sean Payton said. But if he's not a starter, well, then he can play special teams for you, and you have quality. Like, you're getting a really, really good veteran player on special teams, especially to be able to come in and contribute. And then there's Lavelle Bailey, the rookie out of Fresno State, the undrafted rookie who got some praise from Sean Payton. And Sayre, I can tell you this, looking at him, he's athletic, he's fast, he's instinctual. He's still trying to figure it out, but he's got the tools there that's like, all right, hey, let's see what you have in this guy. Let's see what you can get out of him in training camp. Let's see what you can get out of him in the preseason. And then there's veteran Andre Smith as well, who we'll dive a little bit deeper into, that they signed as well in free agency. I don't necessarily think that this inside linebacker race to be able to replace Josie Jewell, which, look, on paper doesn't look easy. You're going to have Alex Singleton, but I think that Denver's got quality guys, at least out of three names right now, three of the guys that have more NFL experience, that I feel like, okay, hey, worst case scenario, Denver has a good situation like between one of these guys. Like, if this guy starts, okay, well then, hey, their depth behind them, you're comfortable with it. And that's something obviously we'll dive a little bit deeper into here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. And really, it starts with looking at a player profile of each of these guys. Can Jonas Griffith or Cody Barton or Justin Strnad, can they break out here in 2025? We'll make the case for each player here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And getting tickets to your favorite events that are going on here, whether that's sports, concerts, comedy, theater events, whatever's going on in your area, the Game Time app gives you exclusive deals to be able to attend those at the best prices that are available, including Major League Baseball. Baseball season is in full swing, and Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the MLB, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer that it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and other things going on in your area. One of the best features inside the Game Time app, outside of good prices, is the fact that they have seat views, where you can see a panoramic view of the action at the venue you're going to attend before you even go. So check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
The Denver Broncos defense needs somebody to break out next to Alex Singleton. Who is it going to be? Could it be Jonas Griffith, Cody Barton, or somebody else? We're going to discuss the possibilities and all of the options here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And subscribe if you haven't already done so, wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Go over there and do that as well if you're not already watching on YouTube, and stick around on YouTube for the 24/7 sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. If you want localized coverage of all the teams that you love for free, streaming 24/7, you want to throw some stuff on while you're working from home or whatever you're doing, do that. Locked On Sports Today, streaming for free 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, right here on the Locked On Sports Network, your team every day. There's no Drew Sanders this year for the Broncos, at least not until late in the season at best. I think that's something that we do have to address, Cody. And he was, to me, the breakout option at linebacker for this Denver Broncos team. And there was the possibility of that certainly elevated the ceiling for this position group right now. But I think with the Drew Sanders injury, even though we didn't know for sure, is he going to play off the edge? Is he going to play off ball linebacker? Without him in the mix, it puts a lot of pressure on guys like Jonas Griffith and Cody Barton to be that breakout player next to Alex Singleton.
Yeah. And look, that's where I think things get a little bit dicey, because the vision for a guy like Drew Sanders was very unclear for all of us going into the offseason. I think even after the NFL draft, we were wondering, like, okay, the Broncos just drafted Jonah Ellis. What does this mean about Drew Sanders? And then, hey, 3 weeks later, we find out, oh, Drew Sanders, he's out indefinitely with the torn Achilles. Like, this happened early on in April, before the NFL draft even happened. And it got out way after the draft had concluded. So it's like, all right, well, maybe that had factored into why they chose an edge rusher. Or it's like, did that mean that, hey, they were going to maybe transition him back to off-ball linebacker? Like, we still don't know the answer to that question. So even when he returns, we're like, we don't know. Like, is he going to stay at edge? So part of me is thinking, I think we can factor in right now maybe off-ball linebacker return there. But, I mean, that's going to be so far out of the question. The Broncos have to look at the options that they have now, and that leads to, obviously, Jonas Griffith. Let's start off with him. I think the one thing with Griffith, he's probably the biggest wild card right now of the position here for the Broncos. He's got an athletic makeup. Like I said, you look at him, dude looks like he was carved out of stone like that. He's got the best athletic makeup and body type, I'd say, on the team. Freakish athletic build, 6'4". You mentioned the height earlier. Like, think about that right there in the middle of the field. You're a quarterback, or you're one of the shorter quarterbacks in the NFL. That 6'4" frame, like, he's tall, but then we're not even factoring in what his wingspan is when he gets his hands up straight up or wide. Like, his wingspan, it's bigger than 6'4". I think it maybe comes out to maybe 6'10", 6'11". So he's got the ability to stretch and reach. And that right there, I think when you get your arms up in passing windows at the inside linebacker spot, especially when teams are trying to target the middle of the field, it's a benefit to have. I mean, you look at guys like Fred Warner, the athletic body type. I would say Griffith has that type of makeup. He has that type of, I would say, vision. Look, not to say he's the next Fred Warner, not to even compare him to Fred Warner, but I'd say from an athletic body type, a skill set type, he is the athletic type of linebacker that George Paton said that the Broncos they're looking for. And then you look at Cody Barton. I think it's a little deceptive, right? I mean, I don't want to say he's wider in a sense, but he's not necessarily like the thinnest linebacker that you're going to have. So part of me is also wondering too, is like, okay, what can he do for you in the short range when we're talking about coverage? Like, the Broncos need to be able at times to go man coverage, which means that these linebackers, Sayre, have to be able to cover a running back. And I think there's still this long pressed illusion that inside linebackers, they're meant to cover the tight ends. No, that's the safety position, folks. Like, that's something that the Broncos have to work out, and they have a multitude of guys. We obviously did a preview on the safety position. But I think really right now going into training camp, we're looking at one or two of these players here, and we're saying, okay, it's got to be one of them. You talk about Jonas Griffith, but Sayre, let's even go back to Cody Barton. This was the one, and I know you had talked about it as well. Washington Commanders fans were excited to see him leave, which, we always wonder, like, okay, like, you always want to figure out what the pulse of the fan base is. But he started and played in 13 games for the Commanders last season before having an injury. He had 121 tackles in 13 games. That's a lot of tackles in that amount of games while still missing some. He's appeared in 78 career games. He's only started 29 career games. And early on in his career, he played a lot of special teams. If you go back and you look at 2019, he played 69% of the Seattle's special team snaps, 71% in 2020, 68% in 2021, 58% in 2022. But then he saw an increase in starting reps in 2022 as a member of the Seahawks. He actually had a big stop on Javonte Williams that forced them to settle for a 64-yard field goal that unfortunately Brandon McManus had missed. But then as a Commander, he only saw 93% of the team's defensive snaps and didn't play a single special team snap. So at least you're getting something to where he can start for you on defense. And if not, he can be an impact player for you on special teams.
And that's the floor for him this year, right? Is an impactful special teams player, which the Broncos knew they were getting when they signed him. And that's huge. And to me, I wonder if the defensive snaps are going to come down to which player can be most effective attacking the line of scrimmage, because the Broncos did blitz quite a bit last year. I'm not sure in terms of the league average or the league numbers, but between Josey Jewell and Alex Singleton, almost 100 blitz opportunities for those two linebackers. And so when you're looking at these guys like Cody Barton, he blitzed 27 times last year for the Commanders, not a ton, and doesn't have a ton of experience doing that. But I think he has the athletic traits to be able to be effective in that way. Like Josey Jewell doesn't strike as like the guy that's going to be a pass rusher from the off-ball linebacker position, but he really improved in that way as the Broncos asked him to do so. And that's a big void that's been left over. It's like, hey, if the front four aren't getting home, you want to send these guys. You want to be able to make an impact. And Vance Joseph's blitzing schemes that he's drawn up, those off-ball linebackers do play a big role in that. That's why I think Drew Sanders was targeted in the first place. So somebody like Cody Barton and Jonas Griffith, they're going to have to maximize those opportunities they get when blitzing. I think that's going to be a big thing to watch this year. And we've talked a little bit about this guy, Cody, but Lavelle Bailey, I know he wasn't called out specifically by name. Sean Payton said the Fresno State linebacker, in the mix to start this year, but that's pretty high praise anyway, right? For a guy who's undrafted to be called out like that in the starting mix. And I think there's something to that. I mean, Lavelle Bailey was clutch at Fresno State. He kind of generated a reputation for himself for making big plays late in games, had a couple of them this past season, including an interception late in a game. So he's somebody to watch, but does he have the size to be able to immediately translate to the NFL level at the off-ball linebacker position? I mean, 225 pounds, that's pretty light for an off-ball linebacker, but hey, if you can make plays, you can make plays.
And that's ultimately what the Broncos are looking for. They're looking for playmakers, guys that are going to step up. And look, it may not just be a one or two players at this position. Like Denver in certain situations could platoon. Like let's say if you need, and there were certain times in the Broncos NASCAR package last year where what did we see happen? Drew Sanders dropped back to inside linebacker on certain times. I think it was in their NASCAR dime package. But then another thing I think you have to factor into the consideration here is that you have guys that have different body types, different athletic traits that can maybe contribute to certain situations that you need. Like if, let's say, Bailey makes the 53-man roster. He's fast, he's athletic, he can blitz the quarterback, but he can also drop back to the middle of the field, like especially a deep middle if you need him to roam that area and protect the line of scrimmage from being able to, a team being able to get a first down. If you want certain height situations, I'm sure you could get creative with a guy like Jonas Griffith. You can get creative with Justin Strnad. I think you're going to see a lot of creativity from Vance Joseph and this defense this season. And I know when I say that, there's going to be some fans out there like, yeah, right, dude, you're not going to be creative with Vance. Vance, look, as much flack as he gets, when he adjusted last year and actually switched it to where they were actually calling his defense, the Broncos defense was playing better. Now you got these guys more comfortable in it. I guarantee you're going to see a better product defensively this upcoming season. Granted, injuries will factor into the equation in terms of how well you do. But I think at this position specifically with linebacker, Denver's in a good spot. And look, we haven't even talked about veteran Andre Smith, who's entering his 7th year in the NFL. Now, here's the thing. He's played a lot of games in the NFL. He has only one career start. Is this something we read into here, Sayre, and say, okay, because of 7 years in the league, one career start, he's probably not going to be involved in this competition here. I mean, Sean Payton had a chance to mention that as well. Like he didn't say that, but he had a chance when he brought up Bailey, he had a chance to mention Andre Smith's name in that conversation and didn't do that. So for me, it's like, all right, is this guy really just fighting for a back-end spot to play special teams because he's played a lot in his career?
I think so. And I think there's an interesting connection too between the fact that last year, I think that one start that he had came last year in Atlanta, where he was playing for Ryan Nielsen, who was formerly an assistant of Sean Payton's in New Orleans. So the ties that bind, right? And I think that this guy has the ability to once again be an intriguing special teams option, but at the same time, I think you feel like the Broncos need to somehow land within those top 3 guys that we've mentioned in terms of who starts this year, unless there's somebody that's just undeniable. When they go out there, they put the pads on, they play in the preseason, and they're like, man, this guy, we can't ignore how well he's playing right now. And I don't know that I necessarily see that from anybody else on this roster beyond those top 3 guys, but hey, I mean, you never know in today's NFL. Jonas Griffith kind of came out of nowhere for the Broncos. Alex Singleton, I know he played quite a bit in Philadelphia, but he also kind of came out of nowhere in terms of where the expectations for Singleton, quite frankly, were similar to what they are for Andre Smith right now, right? And it was just, hey, he's going to play special teams. If he has to start, you're in trouble. And, things changed when you got an opportunity. So how these guys play with the rest of the starting defense around them, I think is equally important as what their individual projections are right now in terms of, man, yeah, this guy, he hasn't started a lot, or he hasn't played a lot, or he's been injury prone. How well do each of these individual players work when they're put in with the rest of that starting defense? I think that's going to be fun to watch this offseason.
Well, who starts at inside linebacker next to Alex Singleton, and who will be the backup options? The numbers game could impact the linebacker position. We'll dive deep into that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is a thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram or social media, but in reality, not everybody does. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. And on top of that, look, life never comes with a playbook or a manual that tells you how you should do things when certain events come up, especially events that can be life-altering. Therapy is beneficial. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past, and the one thing I like the most about it is I was able to fill out a brief survey, and then I was matched with a therapist. I vibed well with my therapist, so her and I did 2.5 months worth of deep dive sessions to help me deal with stress, anxiety, things along those lines that I deal with in my day-to-day life. But if you don't vibe well with a therapist you get matched to, you can switch therapists at any time through BetterHelp. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. As we jump into the fourth quarter action of today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we dive deeper into our training camp position preview, looking at inside linebacker, who makes the 53-man roster, who starts next to Alex Singleton, and who's going to make up the depth. A lot of different storylines going into this conversation on today's episode of the show. But real quick, just want to say thank you once again, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making us your first listen. We appreciate you watching us on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcasts here. Sayre, this is interesting. Now, earlier I brought up the numbers game, right, for this position, because I think in all the position previews we've done, we've kind of leaned heavily on the Broncos, maybe keeping more corners this year. Obviously, the safety has been definitely a question. How many receivers the Broncos going to keep? How many could they keep more running backs? Like the whole special teams conversation has factored into that equation. Could that impact the number of linebackers, off-ball linebackers that Denver keeps on their active roster this upcoming season? The only guy we know is guaranteed to play, Alex Singleton, probably not going to play a lot of special teams because he's a key starter for them. So who gets a roster spot? First and foremost, maybe before we do that, I want to get your projection as to who you think will be the starter next to Alex this upcoming season.
Well, I hope that it's Jonas Griffith. I kind of think that it's going to be Cody Barton based on the fact that he's got multiple years in a row now with over 100 some odd tackles. I mean, he's been a tackling machine when he's been out there, and it's not necessarily to say, well, tackles equals starter, but at the same time, like the productivity and the on-field experience, the availability, that does matter. So I hope it's Jonas Griffith from the standpoint of, I think he might be the most talented linebacker on this team. And from a standpoint of like where my head is going, I think it's going to be Cody Barton. But I don't know, Cody, you tell me. I don't know if my hope is misplaced for Jonas Griffith. I think that he's one of those guys that, man, if he's healthy, he's a potential game changer for the entire defense.
No, I agree. And look, I think it will be Jonas Griffith here. And then I think Barton will be, a guy behind him. And I think Justin Strnad. I think Denver's going to keep 4 guys at this position this year on the active roster. I think they'll get a couple of other guys on the practice squad, including Lavelle Bailey. I think he'll be a part of their practice squad. You have to hope that he clears waivers, which, look, I think a lot of times, a lot of these NFL teams, they're trying to re-sign their own guys. And they're not necessarily, while they're obviously scouting other teams the reality is they're not necessarily placing claims on other teams' players unless there's one player that's calculated on their list. Or like, hey, this guy's free. We need to do whatever we can to put a claim on him. Rarely happens the way that I think a lot of people fear in terms of if they release this guy, they're going to lose him unless it's undeniable, right? Unless it's one of those ridiculously standout performances. I think the thing with Cody Barton, and this is going to be something I'm going to be interested in following here when training camp obviously begins. We're a week away here for Broncos fans being able to attend. There's a lot to be excited about, a lot of these position competitions. But for me, it's how often, do the Broncos rotate Jonas Griffith, Cody Barton, and also Justin Strnad? Is it going to follow a similar trend to what we saw during OTAs? Training camp's a little longer than OTAs and mandatory minicamp. So part of me is wondering, Sayre, as we talked about with the offense and the defense in terms of first team, third team, second team, whatever you may have when they were going in OTAs and minicamp, it was 4 plays per quarterback, right, per team period. Last year in training camp, I remember specifically, it was 7 plays for Russell Wilson, 7 plays for Jarrett Stidham, 7 plays for Ben DiNucci. And I wonder if it's going to go up to 7, and you're going to see that for the defense. But the defense, I would say, even in OTAs, they were rotating guys at a higher frequency at a lot of their positions than they were the offensive side of the ball. So I don't know what it's going to look like here, but I think you're going to see a consistent rotation of Griffith, Barton, and Justin Strnad primarily with the first team defense trying to get looks against the first team offense. And then you're going to see these guys play a lot with the second team. So I think these guys are going to get a ton of reps considering that there aren't as many players at that position right now. This could be a benefit here in terms of the coaching staff really trying to figure out who's going to make the roster ultimately when it matters here in September.
Because also, too, you're one snap away from needing somebody to take Alex Singleton's role, right? I think that's going to be huge to watch this offseason, as well as who's the second guy wearing the green dot, right? Is it just the guy that's next to Singleton when they determine who's the starter, or is it somebody else, And so that's going to be fascinating to see as well. When you're one snap away from we're talking about this position group is one of the most questionable on the roster right now. I would say you're kind of one snap away from being in a pretty sticky situation overall, defensively, because Singleton, I think a lot of pressure is on his shoulders right now to not only be making a lot of plays out there and to make up for what we saw last year, a lot of missed tackles. I know he had a ton of tackles and had multiple 20 tackle games last season, but there was a lot of missed tackles as well. Vance Joseph even called that out earlier this offseason, not specifically for Singleton, but for the defense as a whole. A lot of missed tackles, and that was the main problem last year. There's just so much pressure on Singleton to stay healthy, to produce, to be more efficient than he was last year. I mean, that's a lot going on, especially, God forbid he gets hurt at some point. Then what do the Broncos do? Then where do they turn at this position? Because then you've got nobody who has experience playing in this defense, at least in terms of last year, in the regular season. So I don't know. It's a very tough and sticky situation right now for Sean Payton and Vance Joseph and George Payton in that scouting department.
Well, I'd say if they do stick with 4 players at the position on the 53s, you and I project, I agree. It's almost uncomfortable in a sense, right? Because of if one of these guys goes down, you have to be all right, who's going to step up? And that obviously means not only if there's an injury that happens, you're getting one guy that's promoted to a starter, but then now you have to figure out who's going to come up and play special teams, who's going to come up and be the backup to this guy who was previously the backup. And that's where I think you have to have hope in your player development system that the Broncos have expressed they have a lot of confidence in. I think we're looking to see that as well from some of the players that we're trying to develop last year. What do they look like this year? Is that system and environment that you've created in terms of fostering development, is it beneficial? Is it something that you can see results here within 1 to 2 years? That's the question here. A little sticky though, right? It kind of reminds me of the Broncos safety position maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We're hey, if Justin Simmons because there were a lot of unknowns before PJ became PJ, and we didn't know Caden because Caden was just a young guy still at this point. We didn't know what you're going to get with him. But if Denver has an injury at this position to one of those 2 guys, are you in trouble? And certainly, that's how I feel a little bit here about inside linebacker. But maybe it'll be better than we anticipate. I do think regardless, whoever starts next to Alex Singleton, I still believe that the 2 backups behind them are going to be of good quality. And that gives me a little bit of assurance, but then it's like you're thin because of trying to build your roster. We don't know how it's going to go just yet. So that is the mystery here. And that is why the linebacker position is the Broncos' biggest question mark for them going into training camp in Broncos country. We want to know how you feel about the position. Do you feel like it is thin in terms of depth? Are you comfortable with the guys that they have brought in? And who do you think will win the starting job next to Alex Singleton? Make sure you let us know if you're watching or listening to Locked On Broncos on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate you as always. And that will wrap up our position preview series. You've heard of every position here for the Denver Broncos on offense and on defense. And you've also got to share your 53-man roster projections with us as well. So what's next as the Broncos get ready to report for training camp? Well, Sayre and we're going to dive into the biggest questions that the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix must answer at quarterback this year. You'll get that on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.